Hello again and welcome back. Let's have a look at this second formal letter here with a quite familiar business setting in this one. You work for an international company and would like to spend 6 months working in its head office in another country. Write a letter to your manager. In your letter, explain why you want to work in the company's head office for 6 months. Say how your work could be done while you're away, and ask for his or her help in arranging it. So, as always, let's have a look for some keywords here. So we are working for an international company. Perhaps that will come up within the letter itself, but I feel like it's just important that they wrote international because if the head office is in another country, then clearly they're operating in at least 2 countries, which makes them an international company in a sense. So they work for an international company. We would like to spend 6 months. It's quite important there. We would like to spend 6 months working in the head office. So we need to be clear about the fact it's the head office that we want to work in, and that we want to do that in another country, in its head office, and this head office is in another country. We're going to write a letter to our manager. This is quite important as well for reasons I'll talk about in a moment. Explain why you want to work in the company's head office, so that key why you want to work in the company's head office, and also why you want to work there specifically for 6 months. Those are 2 slightly separate things combining. So it's one thing to want to work in the head office, it's another thing to want to work there for 6 months. So we have to make sure that we're explaining both, really. Say how your work could be done while you're away. Let's just go through all of that here. How your work could be done while you are away. And ask for help in arranging it to happen. His or her meaning your manager. And let's think about that idea of writing to your manager. In the earlier section, in the section before this one, we looked at semi-formal letters. And one of these semi-formal letters was a letter to a colleague. And when you're writing to a colleague, one of your peers, someone that's on the same level as you, it's more acceptable to write in a semi-formal setting. But if you're writing to your manager, you're more likely to have to write in a formal way. And that is especially the case when you're writing letters like this, because letters like this will be filed away and they will be referred back to potentially at a later date. They all need to be stored away, they need to be filed away so other people will read them. So they always need to look very professional. This is like a formal request to move locations. So on the whole, if you're writing to your manager, doesn't matter what company you're working for, you should probably most of the time be writing in a formal tone. So just to always write in a formal tone to be on the safe side. You're never going to be wrong when you write to your manager in a formal tone. So we have a formal letter here. And the purpose, what do you think is the general purpose? I'm going to call this a request letter. So it's a formal request with a business setting. So we need to use some business type vocabulary as well. Let's think about the plan. And as usual, the first paragraph will be a purpose sentence. But moving into P2, we're explaining why we want to work in the company's head office for 6 months. And with this one, I'm going to say it sounds like an ambition level, like that we want to work in the company's head office, but we don't only have to go for that approach. I would, particularly because it's just 6 months, I think we maybe need to come up with something else. You don't want to just be ambitious for 6 months. So let's think about something else. It's not just going to be ambition and that we want to climb the ladder. Possibly we're going for 6 months because let's say our partner has to go to that country for 6 months for her work, and so we want to keep the family together, so we would like to do the same. We'd like to be relocated. So let's say that my wife has wife move work. I'll turn that into an idea later, but the point is that she needs to move for work for 6 months, And we've already got 6 months in the task, but I just want to remind myself to add that in there. So I'm just going to write 6 months here. May as well, hadio. So 6 months, my wife has to work. So we want to keep the family together. We want to stay together. That's why I need to be there for that long. Just remember also to include the fact it's the head office, which we will do as well. So we then want to talk about how our work could be done while we are away. So if we need someone to replace us when we're gone, that means that somebody else will need to be recruited. And who is in charge of the recruitment in the company? It will be the human resources team. So maybe we could say we've asked a colleague in the human resources team and they've agreed to it. A temporary replacement has been found and they'll be able to work there for 6 months. So just human resources team, temporary replacement or a temp, turn that into an idea later as well. And then we want to ask for our manager's help in arranging it. What could they do to help us? Well, it's going to be different for different companies, but in this hypothetical company, I would imagine that my manager will need to, a nice verb here, liaise, basically meet and speak with another person, but more of a business verb to use here, to liaise with the manager of the other office, or perhaps that they are the manager instead of the human resources team in the other country. Because again, we are being recruited to work somewhere else. So we might write liaise with the HR manager in the country that we want to go to. So we'll go with that. Now we don't have that many points here, but I feel in this letter it shouldn't be too difficult to flesh out the ideas using a lot of nice business vocabulary, formal letter vocabulary that tends to be a little bit more drawn out anyway. So I don't think we're going to struggle here. And of course, I think we should finish the letter as well with a sentence about, your typical thank you for your cooperation, yada, yada, yada. And that will also boost the word count. And the important thing is that we are answering all of the task directives, and we will have done that if we cover these points. So let's go into the letter. Let's jump into this here. So what are we going to write? We're going to write dear. And of course, we know the manager's name. We know our own manager. So let's come up with a name here. Let's say, dear Mrs. Harrison. And straight into the purpose sentence. I am writing to. Now let's have a look at the purpose. It's request. So I'm writing to request. But nice business language here. Again, as I mentioned, these sort of letters will be filed away. And when we do that, they're filed away because that's part of the procedure. And when we request something like this of our manager, that's part of the procedure as well. That makes it a formal request. We use language like this when we're following procedures. I'm writing to formally request that I can move abroad. Can I go to another country? We need to make it sure that we're more formal in our vocabulary here. And a nice way of doing that is to switch to the passive. So not that I relocate, but I be relocated, because we are not relocating ourselves. The manager is moving us because we've asked them, but they are the one who is in charge of the procedure. So that I be relocated, that sounds very nice, to the company's, and of course as per the task, head office. And let's come up with a city in another country, again to indicate that we've acknowledged that part of the task. Let's say Barcelona. And now this is important, we have 6 months. So let's say January 2021 to July 2021. So a clear 6-month gap, acknowledging the task requirements. Then we could just move on. Just that one purpose sentence, that's all we ever need. And then we move on to the bullet points. So let's move into that first main paragraph. Why do you want to work in the company's head office? Let's use that introductory language that we have used a few times already. The reason for this, and then we come back to the purpose. Request. What are we requesting to do here? We are requesting to relocate. What is the noun? We can turn this into a compound noun. Noun plus noun. Relocation. Relocation request. Again, sounds very formal, sophisticated, nice and advanced language. The reason for this relocation request is that my wife, let's switch grammatical tenses here. Present perfect passive, has been offered, let's say, an opportunity. So instead of us being ambitious, we'll talk about our wife being ambitious. She's been offered the opportunity to, let's imagine it's get a raise, get a promotion. Those are okay terms, they're okay, but most people will be aware of them. If we want to move into Band 9 language, we would use language more like this. Advance into a higher role. It's a nice expression to use for getting that promotion. So to advance into a higher role within her company. Okay, now that's good, but let's indicate the fact that it's 6 months. So we'll create a bit of contrast here. This is great, but we need to consider this. This is, and here's some nice language here to talk about something that can happen, but it needs something else to happen for that to happen. So A can happen, but only if B happens. This is only on the condition that. Only on the condition that, and then we can bring in the 6 months. So only on the condition that she works in Barcelona for a 6-month term. So we've already, we've got 6 months up in the task. We can try and show more varied vocabulary. It's also more of a business way of putting it, a 6-month term from January, as we've said above, from January. And as I've said in the plan, when I was talking about it at least, I would like to keep our family together during this, we've got term here, so let's go with the word period here, a period of time. Okay, so this is only on the condition that she works in Barcelona for a 6-month term from January, and I would like to keep our family together during this time. As we talked about in the last lecture, actually, you might look at that and think I could remove the comma and the and just go with I would like to keep our family together during this time, during this period. But number one, this improves grammatical complexity. But number two, it's so closely connected to the previous part of the sentence that I wouldn't want to split those sentences up. So it's not just grammatical complexity, but it makes sense for reasons of coherence and cohesion, fluency. So keep that in mind as well. There's a lot to gain from joining clauses together in this way and not separating them off into separate sentences. Do consider whether it is appropriate to do so. Don't just do it without thinking. Yeah, this is a nice way of boosting your score. Okay, let's move into the third paragraph here. We are looking at how the work can be done while we're away. We talked about the human resources team. So let's say that we've taken into consideration how the work could be done. But it's, in fact, you just use that language. I have already taken into consideration. So if this was a semi-formal letter, you might say, I have already thought about. If it was an informal letter, you might say, I've been thinking about. But in a formal letter, I have already taken into consideration how my tasks, you could say, duties is another, how my duties here. Now notice this is a kind of a form of referencing as well. Here being in the office that I'm currently working in. For you, you are my manager in this office. How my duties here could be completed. Not could be done, that's not good enough, but could be completed. Could be undertaken is another verb you could use. Again, notice the passive voice as well. Could be completed, and here's a nice expression, not when I am gone or when I am away, but in my absence. In my absence. Again, much more formal. So a nice expression to remember, in my absence. Now we'll bring in the idea that we've spoken to the human resources team. Maybe we've spoken to a particular person. Again, when you're in a business setting, everything needs to be recorded. We need names, we need details so that people are held accountable for their actions. So we're going to use a name. Let's go with fairly typical Mark Smith. Mark Smith, let's give some information about him in this non-defining relative clause. In human resources, which is the part of the company that deals with hiring people and recruitment, a colleague in human resources with whom I have discussed this plan Notice the range of tenses being used here as well. So we're using the present perfect there. I have discussed this plan with Mark Smith. We can close off that clause there and move on. So Mark Smith has informed me, and more present perfect, that he will be able to, we could say find another employee. Let's go with locate, it's a bit better. To locate a temporary replacement. There's some nice collocations there, some nice business language using the verb locate and a temporary replacement. Now notice here I've used a will. This suggests I might be setting up a conditional sentence where we start on the side of will and then we move to the if. But instead of if, I'm going to use should instead. Some of you may have seen the should conditional before. We can use it typically for first and zero conditionals, occasionally for second conditional as well. You wouldn't really see it in the third conditional. You rarely hear it spoken, but it often, well, sometimes appears in written language, particularly in more formal documents. This is a formal letter here, so it's appropriate for a business setting, so we can use it here. Notice the grammar I'm going to use here. Should this move be approved? So when you use the should conditional, when you're in the should clause, you need to use the infinitive form of the verb, not the usual present simple if you were in the first conditional or even the zero conditional as well. So we're using will, but we're actually using the infinitive. Not should this move was approved. So we could say either he will be able to locate a temporary replacement if this move is approved. That's first conditional. And first conditional in the should form, it will be should this move be approved. If this move is approved, should this move be approved. So you're just showing a little bit more flexibility in your writing, your understanding of using more formal ways of using conditional sentences. So then we can just close that off there. Notice the language, of course, being used here as well, nice and formal. Should this move be approved? Also notice, because we started the clause here with the result side rather than the cause side, there is no comma. We only would use a comma if we started with should. So should this move be approved, Mark Smith has informed me that he will be able to locate a temporary replacement. In that sentence, you would use a comma before Mark Smith and after approved. But in this structure, no comma. Okay, let's move into the final paragraph here. We're looking at liaising with the human resources manager. Okay, nice typical language for requests. I would be grateful if you, and sticking with the subjunctive, I would be grateful if you could liaise with, notice the preposition we use here, liaise with. Let's bring up a name. Again, we need to use names, these kind of details in this kind of letter, with Mr. Paul Harris. And we'll use another non-defining relative clause here. Who is in charge of the human resources team in, and we know where we're going, the Barcelona head office. Okay, bring that non-defining relative clause to a close with another comma and then move on. So we could imagine just going, I would be grateful if you could liaise with Mr. Paul Harris so as to, so in order to, and instead of the word start, much more technical, more of a process verb, initiate. Initiate in this context is appropriate. Initiate the relocation, and we'll use that word, we'll use the word process there. So as to initiate the relocation process. Now I just want you to notice something about this sentence which is a little bit different to a sentence from the previous paragraph, and that is in the use of the non-defining relative clause. We'll just highlight that here. This is the non-defining relative clause here. Who is in charge of the human resources team in the Barcelona head office? Now compare that one to this one up here, a colleague in human resources with whom I have discussed this plan. what you should notice is that the one above does not contain who is, but it can do. You can say, who is a colleague in human resources with whom I have discussed this plan. That's fine. So it's like saying Mark Smith, he is a colleague, but we wouldn't use he, we use who, because it's a relative pronoun that we need. But we can remove that there because we can omit that language when we're following up with the object straight away. So he is a colleague. However, you could not use it, you could not omit who is down here because you don't have an object, you have in charge of, which is a phrase which operates like an adjective, responsible for the human resources team in the Barcelona head office. And you would not be able to omit who is if you were to follow, if it were just to be followed by an adjective, essentially. So it's only if we follow with a person, a colleague, a man, a footballer, whatever, where we're defining that person in terms of an object, but not with adjectives. So make sure that you include the who is. He is in charge of the human resources team in the Barcelona head office. Okay, so then we can finish up with a nice last line, something sort of template like, thank you for your cooperation, and please let me know if I can be of, notice that preposition, any assistance in this matter. Again, just language that you could use for most request letters when it comes to a semi-formal or formal setting. That's the nice thing about task 1 for the general training is, although I do not recommend you just memorize phrases, when it comes to letter language, there are particular phrases which get repeated quite a lot. So maybe you can relax that rule about not memorizing phrases for the letter task in general training. We'll finish this up with a yours. Hopefully you can understand why. Sincerely, because we have the name of the person, and then we want a full name. Let's go with a Harry Jones, and that should bring us to a close there. So hopefully you found this one useful. That's a formal letter in a business context looking at a request for a relocation. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next letter.